and for the next half hour, I will be reading from Buffalo Rising on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As we get closer to Easter, the Broadway market becomes very popular, so here is an article of which the title is Broadway Market Renovations Set to Begin by Buffalo Rising, March 20th, 2026. After several years of planning, renovations to the Broadway market are expected to begin this summer. Capital funding for the $40 to $45 million renovation is from Empire State Development and Operations Support for BMMI. No. After several years of planning, renovations to the Broadway market are expected to begin this summer. Capital funding for the $40 to $45 million renovation is from Empire State Development, and operations support for BMMI is funded by the Regional Revitalization Partnership, RRP, a multi-year $300 million collaborative initiative between New York State's Empire State Development, ESD, local municipalities, and private philanthropic partners. Downtown Revitalization Initiative funds provided by New York State Department of State are also included in the capital funding for the Broadway Fillmore neighborhood. The overall design of the revitalization will include a reorganization of the internal layout and circulation within the market to cluster year-round vendors along a central main aisle with adjoining areas for growth, and incorporation of expanded areas for prepared foods and food production. Raising of a rear parking structure that has experienced significant deterioration and replacement with a multi-purpose surface parking and loading area that can also host outdoor events. Restoration of various character-defining features, such as the Art Moderne, as in art modern, curved walls and window features of the building's facade, and highlighting of the structure's internal concrete elements. Incorporation of new vendor stalls and improved mechanical, electrical, and other internal systems, and new iconic sign elements and lighting on the Broadway and rear facades. Buffalo Market Management Incorporated, BMMI, a new not-for-profit corporation, has been established in coordination with ESD, Empire State Development, to operate the city-owned public market building. Our vision has always been a thriving Broadway market for the East Side, and today we are one step closer, said Empire State Development President, CEO, and Commissioner Hope Knight. Continuing the quote, with major state and regional revitalization partnership investment, we are turning the tide on decades of decline and pursuing a plan that firmly reestablishes the market as a bustling hub in the heart of the Broadway Fillmore neighborhood. End of quote. In February, the proposed design for the market was determined eligible for a Type 2 Historic Preservation Certification by the National Park Service, which will enable the project to receive historic tax credit financing. The Broadway market, built in 1956, is eligible for inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places and is recognized as part of the Broadway Fillmore Local Historic District. The market, which occupied two prior buildings on the site, has been in place at this location since 1888 and has historically played an important role as a center for year-round international owner-operated affordable fresh and prepared food shops and neighborhood services. As the community around it has changed, the market is now seeking to maximize its relevance to Broadway Fillmore and to expand its customer base to serve as a sustainable stimulus to neighborhood development as well as an attraction for the entire region. Empire State Development, in coordination with Buffalo Market Management Initiative, has been working with a design team led by Flynn Battaglia Architects and a construction management team led by Buffalo Construction Consultants, BCC, to prepare construction documents, independent cost estimates, and a construction staging plan to allow the market and its vendors to remain open, albeit in a modified manner, during the estimated 24-month construction period. This next article poses a question in its title. Its headline: Does Mayor Ryan's proposal for the City of Buffalo to be lead agency for the Scajaquada Corridor redesign make any sense? And how will it affect our taxes? The author is Dan Kadzo, and I do not see a date. March 23rd, 2026. Dan Kadzo's answer: Yes, it makes all kind of sense. It's also necessary if the city is to sustainably balance its budget. That's largely because New York State Department of Transportation has consistently shown a callous disregard for the city's social, economic, historic, and environmental welfare in the short and long term. Their actions have had a disastrous effect on our housing quality and density and corresponding tax base. This historic disregard was clearly demonstrated when the New York State Department of Transportation built the Scajaquada and Kensington expressways in the first place, despite staunch local opposition. They obliterated hundreds of homes, destroyed the largest parkway in the world's first integrated urban park and parkway system, and slashed its largest park in two. This era of urban expressway construction was part of Jim Crow segregationists' attempts to keep the working classes divided. In an era of redlining, that is, banks refusing mortgages in diverse neighborhoods, restrictive deed convenances, that is, deeds that legally barred future sales of properties in white neighborhoods to non-white people, federal policies like low-interest mortgages to returning World War II GIs for new builds, not existing homes, coupled with the deed convenances and redlining, this essentially made these loans unobtainable for non-whites, and racial steering, that is, realtors pushing whites here and non-whites there. Urban expressways proved to be the most effective and enduring tool for segregating cities like Buffalo. Urban expressways were so effective for marginalizing people who are not white that Department of Transportation's continued to use them to do so even after the 1968 Fair Housing Act made the other above-described segregationist strategies illegal. This is why Buffalo consistently ranks in the top 10 for most segregated mid-sized cities. The construction of Humboldt and Kensington expressways was itself a direct assault on an African-American community that had the audacity to try to get a foothold in the upper echelons of society along Humboldt Parkway. More pervasively, however, the expressways drained the commerce and job-providing traffic from the surrounding streets and radials. Due to the loss of those jobs and that commerce, coupled with the wealth and tax base many white people took away as they were lured to the new, highly segregated suburbs, many city neighborhoods began to wither. Property values declined, stores shuttered, underfunded and culturally deprived schools began to fail, and people even began to get sick. This is the real Carmageddon, discussed below, that New York State Department of Transportation threatened us with over the years. It's ironic how often what others accuse or threaten us with is in fact a confession of what's in their hearts and minds. The public health in Cheektowaga and Buffalo's east side declined to the extent that New York State Department of Health recently investigated it as a so-called cancer triangle. In my opinion, their investigation was a complete failure. First, they failed to consider traffic pollution and the inequitable infrastructure that concentrates it in some communities. This is extremely important because traffic pollutants include volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, for example, benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, and xylene, carbonyls, for example, acetaldehyde and formaldehyde, black carbon, that is, soot from diesel engines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, and particulate matter, for example, PM 2.5, that is composed of God knows what. That's why traffic pollution is linked to so many illnesses, including preeclampsia, obesity, autism. Why isn't RFK Jr. freaking about this actual link to autism? Depression, anxiety, pneumonia, asthma, heart disease, kidney disease, and several kinds of cancer. Nor did New York State Department of Health uncover the toxic amounts of lead in the soil that resulted from a large lead smelter on East Ferry Street that added to the lead that was a key ingredient in gasoline during the first 75 years of the era of automobiles. And yes, lead causes and exacerbates numerous kinds of cancer. Instead, New York State Department of Health chose to blame it on, quoting, personal behaviors like smoking and drinking. This is blatant victim blaming, especially when they don't acknowledge the correlation between those behaviors and social and environmental conditions like poverty and toxic air, water, and soil. Perhaps that's because they would be implicating people and institutions that manufactured this poverty, pollution, behaviors, and resulting illnesses, namely the redlining banks, state and federal agencies, and New York State Department of Transportation. More recently, New York State Department of Transportation has demonstrated its callous disregard for our city, especially through their handling of the Scajaquada corridor redesign. Unable to get us to support a reinvention of their Jim Crow traffic infrastructure, they dragged the process out over 20 years. Over that time, we have suffered through numerous pointless public meetings where our voices were increasingly marginalized, countless backroom meetings with select stakeholders they felt they could manipulate, false threats to pull funding for any improvements at all, New York State Department of Transportation's brazen falsification of public comments in their project scoping document and draft environmental impact statement, false claims of a traffic modeling proven Carmageddon that would happen if they lowered the speed limit on the Scajaquada Expressway to 30 miles per hour, and a failure to apologize for the death of a 3-year-old boy and severe injury to a 5-year-old girl at Delaware Park that would not have happened if they just did their job. Here's an article about artisans called "The Holy Grail of Wood Slabs Arrives in Buffalo," March 22nd, 2026. A giant wood slab from the oldest tree in the world just arrived in Buffalo. Woodworker Brian Wilcox of Wilcox Design and Fabrication informed me that he and Andy Chambers recently purchased the prehistoric, carbon-dated, 45,000-plus-year-old slab, which was sourced from an old-growth kauri tree, Latin name Agathis australis, which had been pristinely preserved in a peat bog in New Zealand for centuries. Of course, my curiosity got the best of me, and before I knew it, I was heading down the rabbit hole in search of information on discoveries such as this. It didn't take me long before I stumbled upon this fascinating article that details the incredible discovery of a 60-ton kauri tree trunk with rings that spanned 1,700 years. In the article, it talks about the tree being around at a time when the Earth's magnetic poles temporarily flipped, an event that was recorded by the tree itself. Today, kauri trees are not extinct, but they are endangered and protected. Continuing, according to Smithsonian Magazine, wild kauri forests in New Zealand have been reduced by over 99%, with only about 7,455 hectares of mature forest remaining, primarily in the North Island. While large numbers of seedlings exist, mature trees Mature tree estimates vary, with some estimates citing around 10,000 to 40,000 mature trees remaining, many threatened by kauri dieback disease. Kauri forests once covered over 1.2 million hectares, and extremely old trees, that is, over 1,500 to 3,300 years, are rare, with estimates suggesting fewer than 100 remain, according to the Department of Conservation. The remaining kauri forests are now protected, of course, which is why the bog mining has become so in demand. That said, the act of past unregulated mining of the bogs has presented its own set of concerns, such as contributing to deteriorated wetlands, which were primarily disrupted by gum diggers and early farmers. In more recent times, regulations are in place to monitor swamp kauri extraction. So, how did it all start? New Zealand Geographic laid down the timeline of the swamp kauri rush. Kauri wood was highly prized for shipbuilding in the 18th and 19th centuries. Kauri forests were also cleared for farmlands. 19th century, 1860s to 1920s, initial mining activity focused on finding fossilized resin, or gum, left from buried forests, not the wood itself. Following a 1985 ban on cutting live kauri on public land, timber merchants started extracting ancient buried swamp kauri for commercial timber. Extraction increased heavily in the 2000s, with many trees found buried in Northland wetlands being 30,000 to 50,000 years old. As for the kauri slab that has arrived in Buffalo, this is simply another leg of its miraculous journey. Quoting, "The slab of wood that we have was purchased through Ancient Wood. It was brought to the U.S. in 2010, Wilcox told me. From what we understand, 6 of the biggest slab pieces in the world were cut from this prehistoric tree. The slab measures 17 feet by 5.5 feet. We have the carbon dating paperwork. Now the question is, what are we going to do with it? This is museum quality, so we want to make sure to respect it and keep it in one piece. It would be nice to see it as a stunning work of art or as a magnificent table in some public venue, although it could wind up in a private setting. We are in no rush, and only time will tell who will contract with us to turn it into the sensational showpiece that it is destined to become." We're listening to a reading of articles and features from Buffalo Rising on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. From the downtown section, On the Market, Simon Electric Buildings, by Buffalo Rising, March 23rd, 2026. Douglas Development's retreat from the local real estate market is accelerating. The company has put its Simon Electric holdings along Ellicott Street on the market with an asking price of $5.7 million. Jamal paid $5 million for the 7 buildings with 80,500 square feet of space and a total of 1.78 acres of property in November 2021. Militello Realty has the listing. The properties may be purchased as a package on separate east and west sites. Douglas's ambitious plans for the properties included 400 residential units and commercial space on the Simon sites and 200 units on the Mohawk Ramp parcel. 10% of the units were proposed to be affordable. Development was to occur in 3 phases. Douglas made improvements to the Mohawk Ramp and gutted the Burns Building on East Huron Street, but financial woes stalled any additional work. Douglas Development has put a number of its local buildings on the market as it seeks to focus on core holdings including Seneca 1 and potential redevelopment of the Statler. In the health section, Big Reveal, Roswell Health Center expansion, February 19th, 2026. Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center's Community Outreach and Engagement Center that opened in 2023 is growing. New York State Senator April N.M. Baskin and Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes today announced $3 million in state investment for a new wing at the complex. Senator Baskin allocated $2 million in the fiscal year 2025 state budget, and Majority Leader Peoples-Stokes committed $1 million in assembly funding toward the project. The funding will support the development of the HOPE, that is, Health, Outreach, and Prevention Excellence Center, acronym being HOPE, a new wing at 907 Michigan Avenue dedicated to advancing Roswell Park's cancer prevention and early detection mission. Construction on the $4 million expansion is slated to begin this fall. The current 5,900 square foot Community Outreach and Engagement Center transformed and preserved a historical 1878 home in Buffalo's Fruit Belt neighborhood, adding a modern wing with floor-to-ceiling glass and a window-lined corridor. The center houses services focused on advancing health equity and improving health outcomes across Western New York, including cancer awareness, educational programs, navigation to cancer screening, financial wellness programming, and space for community gatherings. Since opening its doors, the center has welcomed more than 16,000 community members and hosted over 800 events, of which approximately 500 were led directly by community partners. In 1 year alone, Roswell reported nearly 9,000 visitors, with 65% of visitors self-identifying as Black. 66% of visitors self-identifying as Black. More than 200 new community organizations have engaged with the center's work in just 2 years. This critical investment will expand access to life-saving cancer screening services in Buffalo's historic Black Fruit Belt neighborhood, a community of deep cultural significance and home to many marginalized residents who face significant barriers to health care. The 907 Michigan location is a trusted resource for residents who may feel apprehensive about visiting Roswell's main campus. This expansion will enable Roswell to further address health disparities and provide care to those most in need. The Hope Center will build on the success of the original space by centering new initiatives focused on mitigating the social determinants of health, including employment programming, healthcare career pathway programs, interventions to reduce housing instability among cancer patients, caregiver support connections, and expanded Spanish and foreign language outreach. Quoting, "The expansion of 907 Michigan marks an important milestone in Roswell Park's ongoing commitment to serve and uplift the neighborhoods we call home," said Candace Johnson, Ph.D., President and CEO of Roswell Park. Continuing the quotation, "We are grateful to Senator April Baskin for championing this work and helping us bring more resources directly to the community." Roswell Park maintains one of the oldest and most active community outreach and engagement teams in the nation, focused on reducing cancer's disproportionately high burden on communities of color, indigenous communities, and high-risk populations in rural, urban, and suburban areas. Finally, in this section called Events and Festivals, this article about 2026 Maple Weekends, dated March 21st, 2026. The weekends are March 21st and 22nd, and March 28th and 29th, 2026. If you missed Maple Weekend this weekend, you still have next weekend to look forward to. If you're wondering how to participate in Maple Weekends, there are still plenty of opportunities to do so. This weekend is simply the first taste of the festival, which is organized and sponsored by the New York State Maple Producers Association. Here is some tree tapping trivia. Sugar maples and the closely related black maples are the best trees for maple syrup production because of their sap's high sugar content. Maples should be at least 40 years old and at least 12 inches in diameter to be tapped. Larger trees over 18 inches can support 2 taps. Sap flow is triggered by temperatures above freezing or higher during the day and below freezing at night. It generally takes about 40 gallons of sap to produce 1 gallon of finished maple syrup. The season is effectively over when the daytime temperatures rise significantly over 60 degrees, drying up the sap flow. Here's some helpful information. When? March 21st and 22nd, and March 28th and 29th, 2026. 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., with some exceptions noted by individual farms. How much? Tours and product samples are offered at most sites free of charge. Museums are the exception. Where? All over the state. There's a producer map to find locations near you. There are plenty of maple destinations close to home, including farms and sugar shacks on the west side of Buffalo, Lewiston, Hamburg, and East Aurora. Pick one that appeals to you and start making plans for a visit. The map of locations of New York State maple producers is at this URL, mapleweekend.com/producers. Maple Weekend being one word, mapleweekend.com/producers. To a reading of articles and features from Buffalo Rising. We read from Buffalo Rising on Fridays at 8:30 a.m. Your reader has been Patrick Connolly. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service with broadcast studios at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. Radio readings are broadcast 24 hours a day, every day, to area people who are blind or have a print disability. This year, our agency marks almost 40 years on the air with more than 300,000 hours of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service website is nfradioreading.org. For more information, call 716-821-5555. Good morning. Welcome to another broadcast day on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, a private not-for-profit organization. Radio Reading volunteers broadcast daily readings of newspapers, magazines, and books to area blind or print handicapped persons throughout Western New York and Southern Ontario's Peninsula. As always, please feel free to contact us with your comments, suggestions, or any questions. And stay with us. Our Reading the Bell phone news is coming up next.
I put political notebooks